Chapter 89-Riley. I'm certain that we could accomplish this much more feasibly with a bit of string, Andrew said as we finished setting up one of our many traps incorporating our silver nitrate and copper purification method. Look, Antoine's rescue trap is supposed to be a test of hustle, and I don't know if you noticed yet, but we haven't really had one, unless having a timer counts as hustle-based, which I don't think it does. He continued messing with the finicky mechanism we had designed on the fly. Around us, the remaining mercenaries were being a big help. Their relatively high hustle made light work of the meticulous traps we were building. Fair enough, Andrew said. I have just the trap for buffing my hustle, but at the same time, I'm uncertain of how this fuse can possibly be lit by a bullet. Well, my friend, that is exactly what Savvy is designed for. Making things that seemed kind of plausible work when they wouldn't in real life, I said. In movies, a bullet can light a fuse if it strikes a rock at the same time and sends out a spark, or put out a fuse if it just hits the dirt. Andrew already had a high hustle stat. That, combined with his ability to buff his hustle when performing a task that requires lots of focus, meant he would be ideal for meeting the requirement of passing a test of hustle. Let's not forget, I said aloud to both Kimberly and Andrew, the only two other players around for the finale. Anytime you get a chance to show off on hustle or to win using that stat, you need to do it. Whether it's running from one of the wolves, throwing something at it, or shooting it with a really accurate shot, we have to show off our hustle. I'm not exactly sure what the consequences of not doing that are, but Antoine's trap was pretty clear. Andrew nodded. I'm not sure he liked me being so redundant, but I would rather be redundant than forget to say something. Kimberly quickly walked away toward the staircase that would lead below the fort. Is she okay? I asked. You might need to go ask her, he said. I will, I said. Right when we finish up here. Finding a super powerful weapon against an enemy was almost as important as finding ways to employ it. We needed to devise multiple different traps and tactics that would use our new and improved rolling silver to great effect. That was actually something Andrew was quite good at. Sure, arguably the best way to take care of it was just to hold a container of silver nitrate that we had stocked up, drop copper in it, and wait for the wolves around you to start trying to tear their skin off, but that was one note. We needed a variety of traps. We needed the enemy confused and disoriented, and we needed to be able to mow through them. There could be a dozen wolves coming toward us. There could be 24. We were preparing for even more than that. The dailies was being a bit weird. It just showed me how many people were out and about in southeastern Carousel. I didn't understand why it was focused on hikers and townsfolk, but it felt ominous. Better to be over-prepared. What I was certain of is that Kimberly was at the center of it all. They would come for her. Everything pointed toward that. But only pointed. I was acutely aware that we were making a massive assumption in our plan by taking for granted that the wolves would come to us. It was one of the first things we were told by an NPC. Were we foolish? I didn't know. I felt like the story had confirmed that idea. The presence of the fort, the location of the catacombs and tombs underneath the manor, the significance of the location, and the fact that the she-wolf, the pack leader, had not yet come to this place confirmed for me that this was the setting for the finale. Moments earlier, we had seen Second Blood come and pass, and I had survived it thanks to Michael's sacrifice. By all rights, I should have been sitting in the theater watching everything take place right at that moment. But it just so happened we had a convenient trap to walk into at the right time. Nevertheless, when the final battle started, I wasn't going to last long, and I knew it. Oblivious bystander or not, I was next. I just had to make it count. Kimberly, wherever she was down underground, was so important in this story. The trap she had received with her celebrity aspect was no joke. So many things revolved around her character, not just because of her relationship with Antoine, but because of her relationship with the history of this place and her connection with our enemy. Everything hinged on her, and all I could do was spout out plans and tactics. Andrew was diligent at work, setting up our various traps and contingencies. I knew I could be frustrating and a bit of a micromanager, but I was truly grateful to have another high-savvy player around. His plans would work as well as mine, or even better. It should have been me and Camden. He was more laid back than Andrew. I wondered what he would have done in this storyline. Heck, if he were here, we would have had Eureka. We wouldn't have spent our entire subplots trapped inside the library researching. He would have had it done in half an hour. It was going to be great if we could just get him back. Him and Anna. She would know what to say to Kimberly. I had a feeling that if she were still here, our problem with Antoine wouldn't really be a problem, though I couldn't put my finger on why. We were so close to the moment where everything was going to be better I could almost taste it. The needle on the plot cycle moved so quickly, watching as we secured our traps, only giving enough of a glimpse to the audience so that they could wonder what we were up to. With every second of footage Carousel got, the mystery built, and our traps became more powerful because the audience wanted to see them. They wanted to believe that we were this smart, that we could actually solve this problem. And I hoped we actually were. But I didn't know. After I had secured the last little bit of dirt from all the holes we had dug up and swept the entire courtyard, just so that the wolves wouldn't be able to see where we had dug, we were finally finished. Now, I could double-check everything. And when I was done with that, I could go find Kimberly and make sure she was ready. And she would be because she had to be. Because when we needed her, she stood up and became the main character, and she would do it again. I knocked the dust off my hands with a few claps and headed to the stairs, still working through lines and possibilities in my head as I walked. I found Kimberly in the underground beneath the fort, sitting on a cot. She was looking down, and I couldn't see her face, but her arms were wrapped around her stomach like she was sick. I approached her slowly. I didn't want to invade her space. "How are you feeling?" I asked, like a hammer through a stained glass window. What kind of question was that? We were down to 2 savvy bass players and her, and even though Kimberly was a jack of all trades thanks to her tropes, having her as the primary melee was scary. "I'm afraid," Kimberly said. She looked up at me. I could see tears in her eyes. "Me too," I said. "I'm not exactly sure how we are going to get to our endgame here. We'll probably be able to take out her troops, but I don't know what we are doing against her. It's probably gonna come down to you." She took a deep breath. "We've been over the plan," Kimberly said. "I feel fear, but not just my own. It's the other woman, it's my character." "Oh, that." Some veterans swore that they could connect on an emotional level with their characters. Others never reported feeling even the slightest bit of outside presence when playing a role. I didn't know what to think. I wasn't going to deny something that so many people claimed to feel, but when I hadn't felt it myself, not in any way I could be sure of, at least, it was difficult for me to empathize. And I really hated that. "What is she afraid of?" I asked. "Is this how the base story goes? How would your character be afraid of this moment unless this moment happened in the original story?" I just wanted to break down what she was feeling so I could understand it, maybe even use it. "She's not afraid of the wolf," Kimberly said. "I know it's crazy, that's what I thought at first, but she's not. She's afraid of something else." That was not the type of answer I was looking for. "What else?" I asked. When I asked it, I was thinking she was going to say there was a twist villain or something like that, like maybe it turned out that Kirst was secretly a vampire or some ridiculous idea like that. "The dark," Kimberly said. "Lonesomeness. A door opening. I'm afraid of love. I don't trust it. This makes no sense. I don't understand." Kimberly was full on crying. She had no drop that should be giving her this information, and I wasn't even sure that this was real insight that would be useful to us. If anything, it was a hindrance. And I wished that I knew the words to make her feel better or to make her understand what was happening. I wished I could tell her that we were going to walk away from this and that my plans were definitely going to succeed. Instead, I had to ask about something else, something I understood better. "Have you even used convenient backstory?" I asked. It had been bugging me for a while. I didn't see the stat bump that I recognized from that drop, but it was unusual for Kimberly to wait until the finale to use it, especially in a storyline like this, where she might need help all along the way. "What?" she asked. She was so distracted she hadn't even heard me. "Convenient backstory," I said. "I was wondering if you had used it because it doesn't look like you did." She looked down and thought for a moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "I tried to use it earlier when I was talking with Ant 1 at the summer camp, but it didn't trigger. I think it's because the background that I made up turned out actually to be my character's background. I just wanted to have some fighting skills, maybe make myself a hunter, but I guess I already was." "Interesting," I said. "And it was. That would imply that convenient backstory only worked when the story you gave yourself was not already in the script." There was a pause in the conversation that I didn't know what to do with, so I turned to leave and head back upstairs to the courtyard to triple-check things. "What do you think the end of my subplot is supposed to be?" she asked. "What are we supposed to be doing on that? Because if it's just a fight, Riley, I don't think we're going to win. I just have this awful feeling." So did I. They say the best plans don't survive contact with the enemy, but we had barely contacted the enemy. I had no idea how things were going to go or if our chemical-based rolling silver was going to do anything at all in the long run. "The silver necklace plays into it," I said. "Should I go grab it?" she asked. "It's just sitting there in the crypt." I thought for a moment. "I'll tell you when," I said. "I'll use the insert shot to give you the moment that you need to go get it. Because I think it's all about timing." "And what will happen?" she asked. "Do you understand what it does? Drawing out a curse, will that do what we need? It could mean so many things. It could be the weapon for defeating the werewolves. It could be a trap. It could be useless. It could be a distraction, against the werewolves or against us. But it would be something. It would be important. And the longer we let the audience wait to find out what that was, the more potent it would be." I shook my head. "Whatever happens, we have to play along. And that is something you are good at." She smiled, laughed, and wiped away a tear. "Yeah, we'll see," she said. I left her there because I had to make sure everything was ready upstairs. And because the finale was moving faster than anything before it, as it almost always seemed to. Not 5 minutes later, Kimberly re-emerged from the underground. And when she came back by me, we went on screen. We basically had the same conversation we had just had but in character. And this time, she wasn't crying, she was confident. When she asked me about the silver necklace, I had another answer. "I don't know what it is," I said. "But when we find out, I don't think we'll be ready." I had to play my character afraid of whatever power that necklace had. Diffusing a curse could mean so many things to a creative entity like Carousel. And if we set it up just right, I believed that Carousel would reward us. What else could I believe? Chapter 90-1 I woke to the faint hum of a refrigerator and the soft rustle of curtains moving in the breeze. My body ached to stretch, muscles tense but unfamiliar, like a coat that no longer fit quite right. When I opened my eyes, the room was bright with midday light. I went to move, bracing for soreness, for pain. And there was none. My body moved like a tightly wound spring. I looked around. No. I sniffed the air. My sense of sight was not dominant anymore. My sense of smell was. I wasn't in the woods anymore. The forest's damp, earthy smell had been replaced by something cleaner, fresh linen, faint soap, and wolves. The scent was thick, clinging to the air like smoke, comforting and unmistakable. It was in the walls, the furniture, and even me. The room was ordinary, a small, cheaply furnished motel room, a plain bed with a thin, floral-patterned comforter. A cheap table with a single chair pushed underneath. On it sat a stack of neatly folded clothes, jeans, a t-shirt, and boots. Like an invitation, like a reminder that I was a person again. The wolf understood. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, testing my body. Everything felt whole. My hands, free of claws, flexed easily. My feet, no longer mangled by silver, met the carpet without pain. I felt strong, rested, healed. But the undercurrent of power was still there, humming beneath my skin. The wolf wasn't gone. It was waiting. It called to me, singing a sweet moon melody that only my heart knew. I ignored it and pulled on the clothes. When I opened the door, the cool air rushed in. I stepped outside, and the motel's exterior stretched before me, chipped paint, rusty railings, and the faint hum of flickering neon. I was on the second floor, looking down onto the gravel lot below. It was nearly empty, save for a few parked cars. And then I felt it. The connection slammed into me like a wave, flooding my senses with an awareness I hadn't asked for. Wolves. Everywhere. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, hundreds of them scattered throughout the town. Their presence tugged at me, faint but insistent, like an echo I couldn't quite hear. The motel wasn't just a stopping place, it was the center. The wolves were everywhere, their scents layered into the streets, the buildings, the people. I leaned on the railing, staring out over the little town, and the pull became sharper, narrowing into a single thread that drew me forward. I followed it without thinking, moving down the stairs and across the street. The pavement was warm underfoot, the fading sunlight bathing the small diner ahead in gold. The neon sign above the door flickered weakly, its letters spelling out open. Through the window, I saw her. Sarah. Serena. Her name was not letters or sounds. It was a feeling carved into my bones. She sat at a booth near the back, her head tilted as she laughed at something one of the human-form wolves around her had said. Her presence wasn't loud or commanding, it was effortless, magnetic. My feet moved before I could stop them, the pull too strong, too complete. I pushed the door open, the bell jingling softly as I stepped inside. The smell of coffee and grease hit me first, followed by the overwhelming scent of wolves. The town seemed to fade behind me as every head in the room turned, their eyes on me. Some watched with curiosity, others with recognition. I didn't know them, but they knew me. Sarah looked up, her dark eyes locking onto mine. She smiled, a small, knowing smile that tugged at something deep inside me. "Antoine," she said, her voice low and steady, as though she'd been waiting for me all along. "Come. Sit." I didn't question her. I couldn't. Her presence filled the room, pushing out everything else. Even as my human side bristled at the weight of her gaze, the wolf in me settled, pleased, its growl fading into something closer to a purr. The connection hummed between us, pulling me deeper into the current of her power. And I realized, with a sinking certainty, that I was no longer running from this place. I was part of it now. My fingers drummed against the table as I tried to ignore the tension in the air. Every glance, every movement in the diner felt deliberate, like the room itself was holding its breath. "What do you think?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, inviting, but it carried an undeniable weight. She leaned back in her seat, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, the other holding a mug of coffee. "It's different," I said, my voice low and scratchy. My eyes flicked to the waitress cleaning the counter, then to the grill cook flipping burgers behind her. Both of them carried the same scent, a quiet, unmistakable power. Wolves, but calm. Wolves, but human. That's one way to put it. "Not what you expected?" Sarah asked, amused. "No," I admitted. "Wolves don't live like this." Wolves clung to the outskirts of humanity and fed on vermin, nabbing a hiker here and there in their search for food. They drank and mated and wilted their lives away until someone like me stopped them. "Don't they?" she replied, arching an eyebrow. She gestured to the window behind me, where the town bustled with life. People walked down the streets, carrying groceries, laughing with neighbors. "There's nothing strange here, Antoine. Just people living their lives." "And wolves," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She tilted her head, studying me. "And wolves," she echoed. "But why should it matter? You're one of us now." I opened my mouth to argue, but the waitress appeared at the side of the table, a notepad in hand. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she had a tired but genuine smile. "What'll it be?" she asked, Her voice casual, but her gaze flicked to Sarah briefly, like she was checking for permission. I glanced down at the menu Sarah had placed in front of me. It was greasy and worn, the corners fraying. My stomach twisted. I hadn't thought about food since when? The wolf had taken so much from me. Hunger, fear, time. He'll have the special, Sarah said smoothly, before I could respond. She sipped her coffee, then added, and bring him a coffee. Black. The waitress nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. You didn't need to order for me, I said, irritated. Her smile widened slightly. Didn't I? The conversation shifted as our food arrived. Sarah's presence was overwhelming. She was too calm, too steady. Every question she asked felt like a hook, pulling me deeper into her world. She told me about the wolves here, about how they lived among humans without detection. Not everything has to be a battle, she said at one point, slicing into a plate of steak. Sometimes, we're just people. Sometimes, we're more. But as she spoke, I couldn't shake the growing pull in my chest, the invisible thread that connected me to her, to this town, to something bigger. It was comforting and terrifying in equal measure. Why Carousel? I asked finally, interrupting her. Why stay here? What makes this place so special? When I said Carousel, I almost scared myself. I had meant the fictional Carousel of this storyline, but hearing myself talk about Carousel the entity, I had almost forgotten about it. I was a wolf now, not a player. Her fork paused midway to her mouth. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she placed the fork down gently and leaned forward, her expression softening. This place holds something for me, she said. Something I can't quite explain. A connection. To the past. To. She trailed off, her eyes distant, like she was seeing something I couldn't. Someone. Clara, I said, surprising myself. The name felt foreign and familiar at the same time. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. So, how did you learn that name? The others at the manor have been researching, I admitted. I couldn't lie to her. They've been learning about her. They found her body. For the first time, Sarah lost her cool demeanor, and for a moment, I thought she was going to transform. But she calmed down. She was silent for a moment, contemplating. Her gaze softened again, and she nodded. Clara was the first. The original wolf here. She was everything to me. She was stolen from me. It makes sense that they would seek her final resting place. I can't believe they found it. I think a piece of her lives on. It walks around, talks, slowly learning, remembering its old self. I think right now, that piece lives in our friend, Kimberly. That name hit me like a slap. Kimberly. My Kimberly. The pull to her was almost overwhelming, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't human anymore. It was primal, possessive. The wolf in me stirred, murmuring about siring her, making her part of the pack. I pushed it down, but the feeling lingered, sharp and dangerous. I need to protect her, I said, my voice shaking. It just came out. From what? From you. From me. From all of this. Fear rose up in me. How could I say this? What would she do to me? Sarah chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent a shiver down my spine. You already have, Antoine. You've been protecting her since the attack at the summer camp. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't be alive today. I owe everything to you. You stopped me when I couldn't stop myself. And now, I've built all this. A pack to end all packs. A real future. Her words hit something deep inside me, stirring memories I didn't want to revisit. But before I could respond, she stood, smoothing her jacket. Come. Walk with me. The streets were quiet now, but the scents of wolves were stronger than ever. She led me down the sidewalk, pointing out houses, storefronts, and people. There are wolves everywhere, she said casually. The waitress. The grill cook. Even the man who owns that hardware store down the block. They're part of this place, just like everyone else. We've been here for years, hiding in plain sight. Why? I asked, glancing at her. Why not leave? Why not go where you wouldn't have to hide? Because this is where the connection is, she said simply. To Clara. To the pack. To everything I've built. Leaving here would mean severing that bond. She paused, turning to face me. And I don't think I can. Her words hung in the air as we reached the edge of town, the forest looming in the distance. The wolf in me stirred again, whispering about loyalty, power, submission. I ignored it, but my chest felt tight. What happens next? I asked. She smiled, her teeth flashing in the fading light. That depends on you, Antoine. The forest loomed ahead, its shadows stretching toward us like hungry fingers as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The wolf in me stirred, hyper-aware but calm in Sarah's presence. I couldn't deny the pull anymore. It wasn't just the pack, or the town, or even her. It was everything. The connection to her was woven into every scent, every sound, every part of Carousel. This place, Sarah said as we walked, her steps light and deliberate, is more than just a town. It's a tether. A place where things started and where they're supposed to end. Her voice was steady, but it carried an edge of something deeper. Grief? Hope? I couldn't tell. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. Why do I feel this? This pull? She glanced at me, her eyes sharp and knowing. Because you're one of us now. Because I've shaped this curse for nearly 2 centuries, and the bond ties us all together. Even you. She paused, her gaze piercing. But it's not just me, Antoine. It's Clara. Her spirit lingers here, pulling at all of us. And through her. Kimberly. Kimberly, I said, the name heavy in my mouth. She doesn't belong in this. She doesn't belong here. Sarah stopped, turning to face me. You think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't tried to understand why she's part of this? Her voice softened, but the intensity remained. When I met her, I lost control. I nearly destroyed the only connection I had to Clara. Again. That was my wake-up call, Antoine. Kimberly is here for a reason, and this time, I will find out why. Sarah studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You feel it too, don't you? The bond. The connection. That's what ties us all together. The pack, this place, everything. It's what makes us stronger. She took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. But it's also what makes us dangerous. This is the night we find her and we find out how she fits into all of this, how we fit into this. We find it all out tonight. I clenched my fists, trying to drown out the wolf's growing need to obey her, to fall into step with her rhythm. There's something else, I said. Something you don't know. They have rolling silver. It's this weapon they made. The wolves they tried it on. It was terrible. If we move on them. Why was I telling her this? Had I just betrayed Kimberly and the others? At that, Sarah laughed, a low, rich sound that sent a chill through me. You think I haven't seen rolling silver before? A monster hunter from the Far East once came here with the same weapon. Do you know what happened to him? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I sent him back to the Far East with longer teeth. Her confidence was maddening. The human part of me wanted to shake her, to tell her how dangerous Riley's preparations were. But the wolf purred with satisfaction, its growl low and pleased. She is powerful. She is right. They'll be ready, I said, my voice faltering. Riley. The documentarian. He'll make sure of it. My compulsion to tell her was too strong. Had we been on screen this whole time? I could barely see the red wallpaper in the haze. Any time I looked at it, I saw a script instead. I wasn't a player. I was living it. It was all real to me. Sarah tilted her head, a curious smile tugging at her lips. Riley? She echoed. You seem sure of him. I hesitated. He's different. Psychic, maybe. He knows things he shouldn't. He has a connection to this curse. Her smile widened, more wolf than human. Good. I don't want it to be easy. If he survives, perhaps I'll find use for him. Either way, we'll see who's more prepared. I waited for Kimberly to return for nearly a decade. I knew she would, and we will meet our destinies together before she leaves. Clara has a message for me, and I intend to find it. Her calm confidence settled over me like a heavy blanket, smothering my fears. The wolf within me hummed with agreement, pushing away the lingering worry for Kimberly and my friends. It was like cool water pouring over a burn, numbing the pain, leaving only clarity. "You'll join us tonight," Sarah said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The full moon rises, and the pack will run together." I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and fleeting. But then the wolf stirred, loud and insistent. It pushed past the fear, past the conflict, drowning it all in a wave of certainty. My lips moved before I could stop them, my voice not entirely my own. "Whatever you tell me to do." Sarah's smile was serene. "Good." As we walked back toward the motel that evening, Sarah's voice changed. It became deeper, resonant, carrying through the air like a command. "Come to me." The effect was instant. From all over town, people stopped what they were doing. A woman at the gas station let the nozzle fall from her hand. A man hauling lumber onto his truck froze mid-step. A child playing in the yard set down their toy. One by one, they began to walk, toward the forest, toward Sarah, their movements steady and unhurried but filled with purpose. I watched them go, hundreds of them, their faces glowing with excitement. Thrilled. Ready. The wolf in me growled its approval, and for the first time, I didn't try to silence it. I let it hum in time with the pack, with the current that bound us all together. The full moon was rising, and it was time. Chapter 91 Kimberly I felt like my heart was connected by live wires. The finale was moving forward so fast. As the day went by and the sun started to set, it was our last day. We had to survive, and I didn't even know if surviving through the night was enough or if we had to defeat all of the werewolves. Either way, if we didn't find a way to beat the pack leader, we would fail our rescue, and everyone who had died or been turned into a werewolf would stay that way. I had to fight back tears. I wasn't the precious, beautiful starlet, I had to be a fighter. That's who my character was in her own way. But she never fought with guns. She fought with something else, something more tender, and she had lost. In this dire moment, why was it I could only think of this woman I had never met? I could feel her tears running down my cheeks, her breath in my lungs, her sullen warning to run, to flee. But not from the wolf. The she-wolf gave her mind no unease at all. I tried to lock those feelings away because they weren't useful to me, but I couldn't do that. Riley would have been able to. Antoine would have, too. Antoine could hide anything. But I couldn't, so I had to make them useful. I had to be the one to protect that scared young woman who was so mysteriously connected to me. And I would have to do it soon. Riley, as he often was right about what would happen next. The fort was a large complex of old crumbling stone walls, but it was still just a large square with stone walls on all sides. There were lookout towers hastily bolted onto the walkways upon the walls so that we could get a good view of our surroundings as the night wore on. We waited hours without so much as a peep. The night grew darker and darker. But when the fight came, it came all at once. I gripped my rifle like it was part of me. We had practiced shooting. Since we all had high hustle, we were all crack shots. That made sense for our characters, and it helped us gain the respect of the remaining mercenaries. From the top of the tower, one of those mercenaries who had stayed behind started screaming. Everyone inside became alert, picking up their weapons. None of us were going outside the fort. The main entrance was closed off. The werewolves could jump over any wall, but that was part of Riley and Andrew's plan. But the man on the top of the wall wasn't screaming about wolves. He screamed, "Survivors!" at the top of his lungs. The cold wind jerked a tear from his eyes, and his scream broke his voice. Riley was up the ladder onto the wall, and I followed. Breathe in. Breathe out. I had to be tough. We did have survivors, all right. In the distance, at the edge of the forest, I saw the blonde mercenary being hauled out by another mercenary. The second one was bald and had a large claw mark on his chest. The blonde mercenary was limping like he'd been injured. "Help!" the blonde mercenary screamed. They were approaching the fort as fast as they could. The blonde mercenary kept screaming, "We were attacked. It was an ambush. There are more survivors. You need to send help." He kept repeating that in exasperated cries like it took every ounce of his will to keep screaming. His cries echoed over the hollow field, and they were all I could hear outside of my own heartbeat. I had to look suspicious of him. I was on screen, and this was my time. The mercenary who had been on the wall with us, the one who had screamed, was calling for the others to go out and help them. But before anyone could follow along with that, I aimed my rifle and quickly pulled the trigger. My hustle was high, so my aim was dead on. The silver bullet struck the kneecap of the blonde mercenary's supposedly injured leg. He roared in pain. Roared. The mercenary who had been on the wall with us heard that beastly cry and went suddenly silent. He looked at me like I was a stone-cold killer, or maybe like I was psychic. I couldn't tell. We were on screen, so I decided to give Riley's explanation. That little drop of werewolf saliva transformed Antoine into a werewolf in a day and a half. I shook my head. I never believed it. It should have taken weeks. The only way someone transforms that fast is if they hid help. Suddenly, I was off screen again, and the blonde mercenary and his friend were back on screen. Riley was right. He was always right when it came to stuff like this, it seemed. After a few moments of trying to feign pain and confusion, the blonde mercenary began to laugh. And then the hair started to grow. The claw marks on the bald mercenary who had been supporting him began to disappear, and he, too, transformed, one bit at a time. But they weren't alone. An army of wolves appeared from the forest beyond, and I didn't have to pretend to be choked up with fear because this was an amount we had never even considered. "Dozens," Riley said. "Hundreds. How is this possible?" Was he pretending, or was he afraid, too? Sometimes, it was hard to tell with him. I knew that part of him was excited for the reveal, as if he had been playing a game of chess with Carousel and finally figured out what it was up to. That part of him scared me, but it was also the part we needed to win. The werewolves charged. "Shots only," Riley called as he directed me back down the ladder. "Pick them off as they come," he said to the mercenary who remained. And the mercenary did. He was a good shot, and these NPCs were built for battle. He must have killed 5 werewolves, or at least hit 5, before the first one jumped the height of the wall and tackled him into the courtyard below. The werewolf had the man pinned to the ground right beneath us as we descended the ladder. The werewolf raised its sharp claws against the man, but as we climbed down, Riley drew out a long silver knife, almost long enough to be a sword. It had a drop attached, something about blades. It was the silver serving spoon. Riley must have had it melted down and reforged. He then fell off the ladder, maybe on purpose, onto the back of the werewolf, skewering it and quickly bringing forward his small sidearm to pop it in the head. As he drew his knife out, he looked up at me as if he wasn't quite sure he had actually managed to kill one. I wasn't sure it was on purpose. We were on screen for that, but it worked for his character too. We didn't have time to celebrate, more wolves were coming. We needed to get to the back wall, where the palisade walls were the highest, and the wolves would have the hardest time getting to us. If we could just get to the top, where an ice perch had been set up, and Andrew was waiting for us, we would be on our marks for the plan. The mercenaries that remained, however few there were, followed the exact orders that Andrew and Riley had given them, taking out any wolf that tried to jump over the walls. Then, the phases of the battle started to march like clockwork, exactly as they had been planned, more or less. All I could do was get a few shots in and wait for my moment. Because as soon as the waves of wolves thinned out, the real fight would begin. Andrew Phase 1, Firearms. We were not conducting a battle against an experienced general. We never believed the werewolves would use advanced siege tactics. Their attack would be simple. A powerful full frontal assault was expected, with a few twists to keep things interesting. Yet, when we designed our defenses, we did feel as if we were planning against a siege because Carousel was our true enemy. We had to cater our defense to its sensibilities. Riley was proficient at this part of the planning. Together, we developed a plan of battle that would give Carousel premium footage and hopefully result in an optimal outcome for us. When the assault started, we did not immediately activate the advanced rolling silver ARS. Riley suggested we start with old-fashioned silver bullets. The wolves attacked from all sides. The back wall, where we had set up our stand amongst the destroyed remains of some old lookout tower, was right up against a steep drop-off, providing extra security for us as the wolves could not clear the wall and the embankment. The wolves would pop up over the front and side walls one or two at a time, at speeds I could hardly fathom, and we would shoot them back. At first, it worked. "Just keep on firing," Riley said. "Knock 'em down." Except, of course, that couldn't work forever. Battle must ebb and flow, and soon, the enemy began to overwhelm us as the wolves started to pour over the side walls and into the courtyard below. We lost most of our remaining mercenaries one at a time. They fought bravely and managed to get several clean kills in their time. They proved quite useful. They, however, were not going to win this fight for us. I steeled my nerves and simply shot enemy after enemy until it seemed my shots began to lose their effectiveness. I couldn't describe why they were failing. I thought I was hitting my targets, but after the first handful, strikes became less effective. The werewolves could only be killed in climactic ways, and getting shot out of the air while jumping over the palisade walls satisfied us for a moment, but it couldn't last. The wolves were now gathering en masse on the side walls to enter. Riley predicted that silver bullets would be most effective at the beginning of the battle, but only as a prelude to our chemical concoction, so we needed to get as many hits in with them as possible before the audience saw what we had prepared. We were surprisingly successful with this method. I estimated we killed nearly 10% of the wolves this way before their trap started to protect them from it. No matter how many trick shots you made, a simple barrage of bullets could not remain climactic. I aimed my pistol a final time at a wolf that had leaped over the front wall of the palisade, and though I was certain I had hit it, reality begged to differ. They were practically immune to that attack now. We needed to escalate. "There are too many," I screamed. "We can't get them all." Riley and I looked at each other. He was fighting harder to hold back a smile than he was to kill the wolves. It was time for Phase 2. Even I had to suppress a nervous smile for that. Chapter 92 Phase 2, The Funnel. Light the fuses. Riley cried as he fired another shot uselessly at a wolf bounding toward us. The wolves crowded the fields to the front and sides of the palisade walls. Some tried to climb the back wall with little success. I aimed my pistol at a small black string sticking up over the side of the left wall of the palisade. Focus. Control. Fire. The bullet struck the black fuse against the stone of the wall, and a spark flew, igniting the fuse. The fuse started to burn down into the ground outside the wall, and out across the outside of the wall itself. To my surprise, the wolves seemed to understand what was going on, or at least they thought they did, as they braced for an explosion. Riley extolled the value of a fuse being lit on screen. He said everyone loves the shot of a fuse burning as it snakes along the ground. "Great for tension," he said. On the right side, Riley had shot another fuse. The payoff was huge because the fuses were not connected to bombs. The design was based on an idea Riley had that I perfected. His idea came from videos involving Diet Coke and Mentos. I had seen them when I was younger, and I saw how scientists in white coats would rig up Diet Coke bottles so that Mentos would fall into them in a coordinated display, causing the soda to spew into the air like a fountain. We created many containers of silver nitrate and distilled water. We laid them out strategically, burying some and hanging others on the outer walls. We affixed the fuse so that it ran over the top of the container, mostly glass jars and bottles, and then used copper wire to hang copper scraps from the fuse above the open mouth of the container. It was tricky finding a way to bury the containers and the fuse then, but we managed it with the help of the diligent mercenaries and some roofing shingles that could be used to stop dirt from falling into the silver nitrate. When the fuse burned, the copper wire would have nothing suspending it any longer, and the copper scraps would fall into the silver nitrate, beginning the process of precipitating pure silver. I would never sign off on this plan in real life, but in a movie, it was practically guaranteed to work with our high savvy. And, it was technically a feat of hustle because of those accurate shots we did. Riley wanted us to use hustle. The fuses burned as planned, and as I watched over the left wall, a blue glow, artificially inserted by Carousel to match the natural hue of copper nitrate, started to light up the battlefield as the fuse ran from container to container, creating an intricate pattern of light that seemed to come from the dirt and grass itself. I could almost hear the reactions, even though they should have been silent. What I did hear moments later were the wolves. The wolves climbing the walls were immediately incapacitated and fell. Those standing in the fields to the left and right of the fort ran like they were on fire, those that could. Others dropped to the ground immediately. They were in excruciating pain as the jars we had buried began to react, purifying silver and, in some manner I didn't quite understand, causing immense pain to any nearby werewolf. The werewolves were smart. They learned their lesson quickly. If they were going to get to us, they'd have to do it from the front wall. We were funneling them toward us. An ebb and flow. The funnel had been successful. And yet, as I observed the wolves' reaction to the ARS, I noticed something odd. Several of the wolves began to flee. That might not have been unusual, but every scrap of literature I had found suggested that wolves were unflinchingly loyal to their pack leader. That was the reason so many were charging enthusiastically to their deaths. Why were some just now losing heart? Some of the wolves fleeing didn't even appear to be substantially damaged. As I watched, shooting any wolf that leaped over the front wall, I felt I could see a faint shimmer in the blue glow, a shimmer. A line that shone over the wolves. I could have been imagining it, but either way, a hypothesis started to bubble into my mind. What if the connection the werewolves had wasn't metaphorical? What if it wasn't hand-wavy nonsense magic or some animalistic dominance behavior? After all, we never figured out why rolling silver worked. Perhaps there was some interaction inherent to rolling silver that we didn't understand. What if the reaction wasn't simply for the story, created by our dogged pursuit of the rolling silver subplot? Perhaps this reaction was a real observable phenomenon that Carousel was using. I had to think on it. Phase 3, the frying pan. As the funnel succeeded, we enjoyed a renewed effectiveness of silver bullets for a short time, but then they began to fail again. The courtyard below started to fill up with wolves that would soon be in the range of our platform. I carried a jar of silver nitrate in my hand, and as soon as the werewolves started threatening to jump up to us, I dropped copper bits into it and shook it gently. Oh, Carousel had fun with that. The wolves would leap 20 feet into the air, almost reaching us, and as they neared our chemical rolling silver, they'd go limp like fish and drop back to the ground, howling the whole way down. They wouldn't get back up. The mercenaries placed strategically around the courtyard made sure to shoot any wolf immobilized by the silver nitrate concoction. But they couldn't get most of them. The wolves were fleeing, not all of them, not enough of them, but many of them were fleeing as soon as they came in contact with the purification traps. If I wasn't mistaken, it looked like the wolves were pausing and thinking for a moment before they ran. 30, 40, 50 wolves. The numbers were unfathomable. Fleeing into the night. Dozens died there, of course, and others took their moment of clarity to decide to continue the fight. Time wore on in the courtyard below, which was filled with wolves. We went from fighting successfully to being overwhelmed within moments. As nearly 70 wolves entered the courtyard, climbing and leaping, we realized we were at capacity. It was time. This time, we didn't use the fuses. Riley wasn't sure they'd work again. He couldn't articulate his reasoning well. Instead, we used a simple string method. 20 large jars of silver nitrate had been buried in the courtyard. They were fitted with lids and a unique mechanism that allowed me to thread a string through the lid and dangle bits of copper from it. When I pulled the string, the copper would drop into the silver nitrate. Similar to the fuse. So, I did. I pulled the string, and suddenly, the jars at the front of the courtyard started to activate, their unnatural blue glow filling the fort. I continued to pull as the string activated more and more jars until all that was left were the cries of wolves in a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. "It's time to go," Riley said after we had activated it. And so it was. Phase 4, the grenades. We had also employed devices with a much simpler design. We took mason jars and soda bottles, added silver nitrate, and glued bits of copper wiring to the tops inside. As they sat still, the copper didn't touch the silver nitrate. But when turned over, thrown, or rolled, well, the reaction was obvious. As we ran, these grenades had been laid out for us along a path. All we had to do was knock them over, and they would activate, leaving any wolf that managed to follow us with a nasty surprise. During our experimentation, Riley and I had argued about different techniques and tactics to employ. This kind of peer review was invaluable in academics, and, apparently, in setting traps for werewolves. We had developed some truly useful ideas, some only theoretical. You know those silver nitrate tests you wanted to do on the effectiveness of the solution itself against werewolves? Riley cried out to me. "Yes," I said. "Let the testing begin," he shouted, throwing one of the jars of silver nitrate into the air toward a group of wolves standing in our path to the next phase of our plan. I knew what he wanted. I grabbed my sidearm, aimed at the bottle, and fired as it sailed over the wolves. It turned out that silver nitrate was quite effective as an acidic solution against these creatures. Even though it wasn't pure silver and the effect wasn't as extreme, it was clear the acid was doing tremendous damage, melting their fur right off. It almost appeared as if parts of them were turning human again, but they never fully did. "Where is the pack leader?" Riley screamed. How prophetic. He had to have seen her. Across the ground, by the light of the moon, and surrounded by the largest wolves of the bunch, was a gigantic wolf whose title on the red wallpaper read, "Serena, the Cursed Lover." She had other character posters on the red wallpaper that were not lit. She probably had many different versions of herself, depending on which subplot won out. One for Michael's subplot involving his people, another for my medical research subplot, another for Riley's documentary, and another for Antoine's brother's subplot. Riley explained that all of those possibilities had fallen away, some by neglect or bad luck, others by intention, as Kimberly's story came to the forefront. Now, Serena, or Sarah, or whatever other name she had, was the cursed lover. Beside her was a rather large wolf whose entry on the red wallpaper differed from the rest. It was Antoine. Now, a full enemy. Kimberly and Riley seemed to have noticed this, and even the 3 surviving mercenaries looked on in awe. We had drawn out the big bad. Riley said we needed to give the pack leader and Kimberly an opportunity to interact for story reasons. That would surely happen now. "I've got one right here for them," he said, holding a jar in his hands, ready to throw when the time came. So far, we had used Riley to great effect. Him being the target in the meta and Kimberly being the target in the story made the werewolves predictable. But it couldn't last forever. The jar Riley was holding shattered, and he quickly dropped to the ground, clutching his gut. We looked around, trying to figure out where the shot had come from. In the distance, I saw the blonde mercenary holding a rifle. It was so easy to forget that humans were weak to silver bullets, too. The blonde mercenary quickly fled out of sight. Riley lay on the ground, still alive, but barely. This was a wound someone with higher grit might have survived, but he was bleeding fast. I thought about stopping to help him as the resident healer, but he sent me away, screaming for me to run. So, I followed Kimberly as she raced toward the field where the next part of our plan was to take place. I looked back at Riley and was surprised to see him sitting up. I didn't understand how he could survive that wound. But I noticed many wolves, 20, maybe more, gathering around him. Their acid burns enraged them, their human parts seeping through their wet, burnt fur. He looked up at them and, in a tired, defiant voice, said, "You fellas ever seen a mummy movie?" And with that, his stats jumped. He gained grit, hustle, and moxie. What was his plan? He stood to his feet and started to run, not toward the field, but toward the manor itself. The wolves didn't care about me. They followed him. After all, he did have the lowest effective plot armor, even with his buff. Was he really going for it? Chapter 93 Riley Ever since we had unearthed Clara Withers, there had been this lingering question: what were we going to do with her? The answer couldn't be to leave her underground and ignore her. There were just too many possibilities. We could have tried to set things up so that, when we removed the necklace from her desiccated body, the werewolf curse itself would fail. But I had no faith in that plan. We could have tried to lead the pack leader to Clara in hopes that she would suddenly lose the will to fight when she found the corpse. Unfortunately, I had never been able to confirm the exact relationship between those two parties. Just guesses. I suspected the relationship changed with the story. I mean, I wasn't an idiot. I knew this was a tragic romance situation. But there were all sorts of things that could happen in a tragic romance. We knew going in, thanks to Cassie and her prediction, that there were two women, two lovers, fighting. Was that fight still happening? I had no idea. In the end, we were going to have to play it by ear. I had it all pictured. I could take the necklace off the body, magically reviving Clara and putting an end to the violence all at once. As the two of them finally embraced each other after so many years, assuming that was the thing they were inclined to do, Kimberly would pop the pack leader in the head with a silver bullet. Yes, it would be tragic. But at the end of the day, our goal wasn't just to put a stop to the violence. We had to kill the pack leader or otherwise save ourselves from the werewolf curse, and it wasn't clear how we were going to do that. But suddenly, as I lay bleeding out in the dirt with werewolves running toward me, I realized, and I thought that Andrew also realized, that this werewolf curse wasn't just a metaphor for a disease or some hand-wavy magic. There was something physically in the air, even if we couldn't sense it easily. Werewolves didn't just obey the pack leader, they were controlled. We watched in amazement as some wolves, I'd go so far as to say half of them, simply gave up the moment Rolling Silver seemed to disconnect them from the pack. It was a remarkable thing to see. I started thinking about what we knew about werewolf hierarchies. These were things we had largely taken for granted because they seemed so basic. These werewolf packs were not based on physical dominance. The literature didn't even use the words alpha or beta to describe these relationships, and none of the other players understood how funny that was. No, it seemed to be the other way around. The werewolves became more powerful depending on where they were in the hierarchy rather than the reverse. New wolves were so completely submissive that the humans within them basically had no control. With the revelation that this was all some sort of quasi-mind control, I realized there was an extra option, something we could do with Clara Withers that I had not considered before. If it was true that the werewolves seemed to obey the oldest wolf with the greatest connection to the magical curse, what if we were to find one even older? What if we could introduce a little chaos? I didn't like to be playing things on the fly like that, but in the blue glow of the advanced Rolling Silver concoction, I had seen something. I had seen the magical force that made those wolves tick. We all had. I couldn't ignore it. My body was losing vitality, so I decided to activate my raised by television trap in hopes that it might give me just enough grit and hustle to get down into the underground crypt. And it had. That trap had seemed so unwieldy when I first received it, but now it fit like an old pair of jeans. With a few extra points of grit, I could barely even feel my body shutting down. But since I was still alive, those wolves, or at least many of them, were still after me. I ran as fast as I could, suddenly regretting that I had given my silver trap knife to Kimberly in anticipation of my imminent demise. I just needed to run as fast as I could to the manor. It was only a football field or two away. I could run that. I just had to put one foot in front of the other, crunching the leaves underneath as I made a beeline for the manor. The issue was that Carousel likes to create a variety among its mobs when creating monsters. You'll have enemies that have the same tropes but different arrangements of stats. We didn't need the Atlas to know that. It was obvious if you ever had a bunch of monsters running after you. Some of these wolves had their physical stats placed into grit. Others had it placed into metal. But unfortunately, About a third of them had most of their stats in hustle, and I could not outrun them. I quickly realized this as I looked over my shoulder and saw a dozen wolves gaining on me. Luckily, Carousel had given me plenty of time to think ahead. We had placed a bunch of advanced rolling silver grenades along the path to the manor, and as I ran by them, all I had to do was kick them over for them to activate. Those wolves were scared to death of whatever the process of purifying silver was doing to them. They would give the grenades a wide berth, effectively nullifying their hustle advantage. I managed to get to the manor doors with a 10-yard advantage and quickly headed down the stairs into the basement, where I found two werewolves quietly whimpering in their cages. They had become mere scenery by that point in my mind. They were only there to remind us of why we had come, because we needed to rescue allies. I ran deeper into the tunnels. This time, I didn't run around in circles trying to make the path look longer than it was. I could feel myself growing cold. Even with a few points of extra grit, I didn't have long. And although I was not technically hobbled from the gunshot wound I had received, I was holding my gut, unable to get a full sprint. Through the tunnels to the little hole that would lead to the crypt, it didn't take long for the wolves to catch up. As I rounded a corner and found a straightaway that would lead me to the crypt, a wolf came right behind me. It could easily have grabbed me, except for the fact that it suddenly lacked coordination. It kept going instead of banking and crashed into the wall. Two more wolves did the same, crashing into each other. It was the silver in the walls. I knew we should have tested what effect it had on the wolves. It had kept Logan and Avery sickly. Perhaps we should have had the final battle down here. But I didn't have time for regrets. As the wolves seemed to have become incredibly clumsy underground, I could hear them sniffing rapidly, as if their senses were suddenly dulled so greatly that they could barely make out where they were going. Unfortunately, the underground wasn't really that complicated, and I needed a light to see where I was going, so they could surely find me. The hole leading to Clara's grave was too small for the wolves, so it would buy me some time. As soon as I jumped through the hole into the crypt, I turned on one of the lanterns we had left down there. I also set my flashlight up so that I could get a good view of the mausoleum. Then, I took out the little handheld camera Carousel had given me, because my character was a documentarian. I was probably doing a terrible job filming myself, and I wasn't even sure if this outdated camera could pick up visuals from the meager lighting sources I had. But I had a feeling it wouldn't matter. The camera was just a prop. I just had to find the right words and say them with conviction. I turned the camera at myself as best as possible and began my rant. How long have we sought to understand the hierarchical structures of a werewolf pack? I asked, tired, panicked. They defy anything else seen in nature. But again, they are not natural, they are supernatural. It has occurred to me that werewolves need a dominant leader, but that leader is not chosen based on physical prowess, as it seems their physical prowess is arbitrarily assigned, and without relation to the original body of the host. I paused, my thoughts racing. No, I believe there is some measurable magical connection between these wolves. I was interrupted as the wolves started digging into the hole to get into the crypt. The sound of their claws against the stone sent a chill down my spine, but I pressed on with my speech. It appears to me, I continued, that there is one solution to disrupt these wolves' devotion to the she-wolf, to this pack leader that would have them kill me and the others. I need to introduce another wolf, one with a stronger connection to this ancient curse. Something to disrupt their absolute obedience, if only for a moment. It was clear to me that the rolling silver process was curing them of some sort of manipulation or supernatural suggestion that the pack leader had over them. I believed that introducing another werewolf, an older werewolf, might be exactly what we need. I entered the mausoleum and shined my flashlight down into the coffin of Clara Withers, onto her corpse. I breathed a sigh of relief that she was still there. I was half expecting it to be empty again. Luckily, I was on screen, and Carousel didn't feel like playing any pranks on me this time. This may be too much to suggest, I said, but if the werewolf curse is indeed a curse and is inherently magical, and if it is true that the only way to kill a werewolf is to pierce its heart or organs with a silver object like a bullet or knife, undoubtedly disrupting this magical power. Then I have to ask, how is it possible that Clara Withers, reportedly the most notable werewolf of her time, is dead? I paused for dramatic effect, letting my voice falter with emotion as I heard the werewolves breaking into the crypt. I filmed down into the coffin. I pointed the camera at the necklace. I couldn't feel its malignant presence, I said, my voice shaking. I couldn't feel it continuously fighting something, continuously draining. Why would it need to do that unless there was something within this coffin to fight? I confess that these matters are beyond my understanding. I didn't have to pretend to be nervous, I could almost puke at that moment. I was on the edge of passing out. Heck, I was on the edge of dying. But I didn't stop. I don't have much time left, I said, but if I can disrupt these wolves long enough for my associates to survive, then I must. I reached down into the coffin, grasped the silver necklace, and tugged. In movies, necklaces come off by tugging. You don't have to lift them over your head or undo the clasp. Somehow, they just rip right off without breaking permanently. This silver necklace was no different. At first, it felt normal, like a piece of jewelry. But then I suppressed a smile as I realized that not only was it a piece of jewelry, it was custom jewelry. It was plastic. It was another prop. The real one, if it existed, was still out there. But I, among many other things, was an actor. The power of a psychic, or the grandson of a psychic, is determined by how hard they sell it. Anyone who had seen 13 Ghosts, dumbly stylized as THIR13EN Ghosts, would know that. I acted like pulling that necklace off her corpse was the hardest thing I'd ever done, as if it weighed 10,000 pounds, as if it had needles sticking out of every edge. In truth, it was just a small plastic vial filled with some silver liquid. But I pretended it was the sum of all evil. I didn't have to work hard to pretend to be in pain. Eventually, I got the necklace off. I fell back against the wall, sliding down to the ground, and hoped I was right. There was silence. Nothing happened. Not at first. And Carousel, as I was getting used to, had its own tempo. Something started to move in the coffin. I couldn't see it from my position on the ground, my strength had left me, but I looked up, intent on seeing whatever it was. The werewolves had gotten to the mausoleum and were about to enter, ready to tear me to pieces. But right before they did, they stopped. They seemed to see something in front of them, something rising out of the coffin. Something that scared even the wolves. A body rose up. No, it sat up. Desiccated, dry, and dead, yet shaking as if possessed. I could see her blonde hair, her empty eye sockets. I could see the gaunt look on her dried face. Then those thin, bony limbs started to get thicker, and her arms began to grow longer. Silver light washed over the mausoleum, lighting everything. Wind blew from nowhere, making it hard to breathe. It was so powerful. My flashlight flickered, and every time it did, the corpse of Clara Withers became bigger and hairier. What started as a scratchy gasp became a growl, then a roar, as the dead rose and transformed into the largest werewolf I had seen outside of the pack leader. By the time it had finished, the creature before me, once dead, was alive again. I had to look at it, stare straight into its eyes, and not flinch. I could not let the audience think I regretted my decision. I had to show them my conviction, my psychic intuition, even through all my doubts. It was all down to Kimberly now. She was the one who might be able to take this loop in resurrection and turn it into a victory. I had to trust her. She had trusted me. I fully expected the resurrected wolf to attack me. But it didn't. It just stared back at me until it heard a whimper outside the mausoleum. The wolves began to howl, bark, and cower. They were running. They were fighting each other. I had wanted to inject a little chaos. As the wolf jumped from the coffin it had sat in for nearly 200 years and out the exit of the mausoleum, I hoped that I had done a good thing. That the others would figure out what to do. It gave me one last look before leaving. And while the wolf didn't kill me, it didn't need to. I was raised by television, and I died by it, too, bleeding out in a crypt. In the blink of an eye, I was sitting in the theater again. It had been a long time since I had gone there. This time, something strange was happening. To my left and right, I could see people leaving the rows of seats as if they had been sitting in this very theater until the moment I showed up and were now being ushered out. I could hear them behind me, whispering. I could hear the sound of their clothes swaying and rubbing against each other. I could hear their steps. I could feel them staring at the back of my head as I sat frozen, my eyes locked on the movie screen at the front of the room. After a few moments, the room fell silent. No more whispers. No more footsteps. I was helpless now. All I could do was watch and hope that Kimberly and Andrew might be able to finish what we had started. On the screen, I saw Kimberly standing in the clearing. Most of the wolves had fled. There were 50 or so left, maybe up to 70. It was hard to tell. The smaller wolves were freaking out, no doubt due to the introduction of a new potential pack leader, one older and more connected to the curse than the one before. Kimberly and Andrew stood next to the one remaining mercenary. They had just activated the next phase of the fight. The one we called Christmas lights. We had no shortage of glass containers, silver nitrate, or copper bits, and plenty of nimble fingers to assemble our plans. Now, as the fight started to close in and the pack leader got closer to Kimberly, she began to transform back into a human. Bottles hanging from the trees all around started to glow. They had been rigged so that, with a pull of a string, they would flip and swing down from the branches. The branches, combined with the wind, agitated the contents, creating a perfect battlefield where werewolves would be at their weakest. The trees all around glowed with that brilliant Windex blue. Kimberly was making her last stand. Our last stand, perhaps. The pack leader, who turned out to indeed be Sarah, from Kimberly's photos, stared at her with respect. She wore a smile, and nothing else. It looked like we were going to lose that PG-13 rating. If we ever had it. I sat and did nothing else because I could do nothing else and watched my fate unfold. Tobe continued. Thanks for listening.